So, as we are trying to determine the stocking rate for a set piece of rangeland, we need to not only think about what the rangeland can sustain or handle from an impaction standpoint, but also what our animals need in terms of nutrients. So, we know that basically grazing pressure can come in three different categories: low, medium, and high. And so, years and years of research have shown that if we stock rangelands in the West at a low or a medium level, regardless of if you're in the sagebrush steppe or annual grasslands, then animals, and specifically in this case, steer gain, is going to be pretty comparable. However, if you stock high um, rates of or stock high amounts of cattle to where you have a high stocking rate, then their gains can suffer pretty significantly all the way through. And so, but especially as you get out here to the end um, of a finishing period, like you would at the end of a stocking season, you can see drastic differences between stocking at low and medium versus a high stocking rate. So, stocking rate really does affect cattle gains pretty significantly. So, this is just another way to look at this concept here. So, on the x axis, we've got low, moderate, and excessive grazing, and on the y axis, we have production per animal in terms of total pounds. So, if we stock somewhere in between this moderate to excessive stocking rate, we see a drastic decrease in the production per animal. And so this comes from competition for grasses. Greater populations in a pasture can also lead to disease as well. So you can see animals get sicker if they're in highly concentrated areas, and it's going to force animals to eat the really undesirable plants. And if you're in the Great Basin, that could even be some of the toxic or poisonous plants that will either send them off feed or it will end up killing them completely. So we start to see a lot of production per animal decreases as we move from the moderate stocking rate into the excessive. So again, we can see this effect actually continue to play out the heavier the rangeland is stocked. So you can be whatever is excessive for a certain piece of rangeland, and you can see pretty drastic decreases in production per acre as well. So this is a figure that Dr. Bement actually created and published in '69, and it's a really good way to kind of visualize proper stocking rates in a general sense. So we've got three categories here. We've got understocking, optimum stocking, and then overstocking. And so as the stocking rate increases from left to right, we've got two values that we're looking at here. So maximum gain per animal is the solid line, and gain per acre is the dashed line. And so gain per acre is really essential in the range world because that gives us an idea of how much each acre is willing to contribute to production. And so as you can see in the optimum range here, we've got, that's where both of these lines kind of meet. So it's a happy medium. So we're going to see the top end of gain per acre, and we're going to start to see the maximum gain per acre just start to drop with the optimum range. So this another interesting part here that a lot of people don't really understand is that if you are understocked on a pasture, the gain per acre will actually decrease pretty significantly, even if you're understocked. And the reason for that is because grazing actually challenges grasses to grow. So every time an animal takes a bite, it actually is signaling all of those growth mechanisms in the root to start growing again. So in an active growing stage, those plants will be challenged to grow and will actually produce higher quality forage compared to if they weren't challenged. So again, it comes with a balance of managing for healthy rangeland versus managing for gain per animal. So the reasons that we set stocking rates below carrying capacity are to obtain desirable production per animal, but also desirable production per acre as well. And so just keep in mind that whatever is desirable or optimal depends on what the manager's goals are and the forage, the soil, and the climate, in addition to the precipitation that a piece of rangeland will actually get. So how do we calculate stocking rate? There's a really simple four-step method that if you do this the same every single time, you will be able to create a habit that will help you to easily calculate the stocking rate. So first step is to calculate usable forage. Second step is to adjust for terrain, water, or other constraints. The third step is to calculate the forage demand of the animal. And the fourth is to calculate stocking rate. So this forage demand method should be used when you have no previous stocking information from previous years. It can be used to estimate carrying capacity if you're doing like a biological survey or a land appraisal. And then it can also be used to consider changes in kinds or class of animals. So if you are traditionally, grazing wildlife species on a wildlife refuge and want to introduce cattle or sheep, you can figure out exactly how much that piece of rangeland is producing. So just keep in mind that stocking rates should be flexible versus constant. As flexible stocking rates really enable you to balance things that you can't predict, like drought. So, a flexible stocking rate refers to no more than 60% of a herd in a breeding stock, whereas a constant stocking rate is something that we can use in the grassland areas to get more consistent rainfall. Um, and but out here in the West, you should only use a constant stocking rate if you are stocking 25% below what the average is. And then you can keep that constant because that in itself accounts for drought and things that we can't really predict. So, stocking rates should be based on a few different pieces of information. So, past experience is the most valuable, what the current situation is, which can include management decisions and goals, long range weather forecasts, financial goals of the operation, and anything else that may come into this. So, especially out here in the West, um, we deal a lot with NRCS and riparian maintenance. And so there's been lots of research done to um, fence off riparian areas. And of course, we have a lot of those here in California. But as a condition of fencing off those areas, um, if you get into an NRCS program, they may actually limit the time that you can graze pastures up next to riparian areas. So all of these things need to come into consideration when you are establishing a stocking rate. So the idea with the stocking rate is that it's not 100% foolproof. So even though you do your best to estimate how much forage is out there, what the animals are going to eat, etc., there are things that can change those that you may not know about. So when you are trying to set your stalking rate, the other half of that equation is to monitor. And so when you monitor rangeland, you are establishing parameters that define rangeland trend. And so rangeland trend is the change in plant composition or rangeland health over time. And so you always need to be monitoring um, and adjusting your stalking rate based on the results of those monitoring practices. So the grazing principles that will come into play here are which animal, both species and class of production that you're going to use, how many animals, which is the actual stalking rate equation, and then when to graze or not graze, so the grazing system. So being able to match the number and the type of animal to the rangeland vegetation, its topography and climate is really quite a challenge. So that's what makes this part of the job really fun, in my opinion. So when we look at grazing capacity, just keep in mind that it's really important to use caution when estimating grazing capacity. You want to make sure that you're combining what the animals are going to use, so utilization measurements, interpretation of current range conditions, knowledge of past and present stocking rates. Then it's important to monitor and adjust those grazing capacities and stocking rates as needed.